All right, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us today. Today's topic is a Cscape 9.9 Service Pack 3 walkthrough. All right, let's take a look at our agenda today. We're going to do a quick review of the 2020 software roadmap so we can get the big picture as to where Service Pack 3 fits in the big picture of releases for this year. We'll talk about its new features and enhancements. We will have several demonstrations and examples. We'll talk a little bit about the firmware requirements. Some of these features will require new firmware for the controllers that they run on. We'll talk a little bit about bug fixes. There's not a lot of bug fixes in this particular release. It's more about really more about new features than it is bug fixes, but they're in there as there always are. And then, as I mentioned multiple times already, we will take questions at the end of the session. All right, let's do a quick review on the roadmap software-wise for 2020. For those of you who are not as familiar with Horner or with our software product, Cscape, Cscape is a product that we designed. We first released more than 20 years ago as the primary software package that we use to program our all-in-one controller products. Our primary product is called an OCS, which stands for Operator Control Station. And Cscape, which is, again, is our programming package, is the one software package that programs every aspect of our products, and it programs every product we've ever manufactured that's an all-in-one controller. So while many manufacturers have transitioned from software package to software package, we've done the very best we can to keep our users up to date with good software, modern software, as we continue to enhance it. But we have avoided as best we could abandoning your products and older software packages along the side of the road, which seems to be a trend in the industry these days. And we're continuing with our efforts to keep Cscape modernized and to keep supporting our customers. From a control standpoint, there are 3 languages that are built into Cscape or available in Cscape. It's one software package, but even though there is one way to configure screen graphics and one way to do communications configurations and hardware configurations, we give our users the choice in terms of their logic style. So the very first logic style that was released in Cscape was advanced ladder logic that was register-based. So that means that for every variable you create, you need to map it to a specific memory address. And surprisingly, it remains the most popular means of programming Cscape today, probably because we haven't abandoned it. Another method, which we're starting to put more emphasis on, is advanced ladder, but that is variable based. So you only have to map certain variables, specifically those which are typically tied to real world inputs and outputs. So maybe a specific input needs to be matched to a specific variable, or an output needs to effectively see its way through to an output pin to turn a motor starter on. So those in advanced ladder with tags, those are the types of things that you need to map. But other routine internal variables do not have that requirement. And then for some time, we have supported the standardized IEC style programming, which is also becoming much more popular. It's also a tag-based approach, but it's very standards-based. So we don't stray very far from the standards in terms of what we do with our IEC package, whereas we're a little bit more creative on the ladder side of things. So again, we provide our users with 3 different options. Now we have 3 software releases of significance planned for this year, from now until the end of the year. Service Pack 3, which we're talking about today, and whose release is imminent. It will end up being a significant upgrade in our tag-based advanced ladder logic. Now it's going to offer something for everyone. So if you're not a tag-based ladder logic programmer, don't fret. There is plenty in there for you. But that's the emphasis of Service Pack 3. Service Pack 4, available later this summer, its emphasis is really on a significant upgrade to our IEC programming language package. Again, it's all part of Cscape, but it's one of the logic choices. And then Cscape 10 features a brand new graphics engine with ground-up redesigns of many of our objects, including trends, alarms, recipe handling, and a whole lot more. And it also will result in a significant update to the development environment for all aspects of programming a OCS all-in-one controller. And very importantly, that we want to stress again, Cscape will remain free. All right, now let's talk specifically about Service Pack 3 and new features and enhancements. Okay, one of the enhancements that we're rolling out kind of in a soft fashion with Service Pack 3 is what we're calling Cscape registration. So traditionally, in order to use Cscape, traditionally you would register on our website, answer a few questions, and then download the installable, and then install the software and use it at your heart's content. And that process, for the most part, will continue. We're just adding an extra step at the end, and that is after you've installed Cscape, every time you go to use it, you will effectively log into the software package. That's a more modern 2020 approach. And we're not trying to be, too intrusive on your privacy. What we're trying to do is to provide a tight feedback engine between our Cscape user base and our engineering group, so that we can have a better understanding, not of your proprietary information or anything that you don't want to share, but so we have a better understanding of what features you're using in Cscape, what languages you're using in Cscape, so that we can put our resources aimed at the features that people are using and the things that the improvements that people want to see. And when you do have a problem, a bug or a crash or something like that, you'll have a tighter feedback loop with our developers to get that reported and get that addressed quickly. From a user advantage, in addition to the tighter feedback loop, you'll also see a consistent setup of the software if you load it on multiple computers by logging in as you run it. There'll be much easier licensing of WebMI and any other licensed features as they're released. That'll also be a benefit as well. So initially with Service Pack 3, the registration will be disabled, and then we will be working with some of our longtime customers to try it out and get started with it as we make sure that everything goes super smoothly. One thing I'll also mention is, for those of you who have maybe logged into our website recently over the last few days, you may have noticed that you had a requirement to kind of re-register, if you will. And that's because we had a big upgrade to the security aspect of our site. And also we've created what we call a universal login, which will allow you to log into any Horner website or to Cscape or any other Horner software package with a single set of login credentials, which we think is a big advantage. Now we're going to cover registration in a lot of detail, the process and its benefits in a future program. So I don't want to spend a whole lot more time on it today. Okay, the enhancements we're going to kind of categorize into 4 different areas. We're going to talk about enhancements to Service Pack 3 as it relates to tag-based advanced ladder programming, as it relates to graphics, as it relates to Ethernet networking, and as it relates to communications protocol. So those are kind of the 4 different categories of improvements that we're going to kind of lump everything into. All right, let's start with the tag-based advanced ladder. Now, I mentioned earlier, we're not abandoning register-based programming at this stage or anything like that, but we are putting more emphasis on tag-based approach. It's really a more modern approach to variable handling. It requires far less mapping of variables to specific memory locations, which saves time. We have had it available for a few years now, but we have not emphasized it, and it's had some limitations that we haven't really addressed until now. Now, one way we'll be emphasizing it is we will start transitioning our training program over to tag-based advanced ladder over the upcoming months. And we are encouraging, we're not forcing, but we are encouraging our register-based customers to become familiar with the variable-based approach or tag-based approach, because it's really a more modern approach and you should be able to see some benefits from it after you get past the learning curve. And then for those of you who have a large library of existing Cscape programs that are all register-based, Service Pack 4, which is not this release, but the next one at the end of the summer, it will provide the ability to convert your existing register-based programs over to a variable-based or tag-based program. So that's around the corner as well. So for those of you in that boat, getting familiar with the tag-based approach in Service Pack 3 might be a nice thing to do while you prepare for Service Pack 4 and the ability to convert your programs if necessary. Okay, so what are the major upgrades that we've done with tag-based ladder to make it more attractive? Well, first of all, the existing package with previous versions supported a maximum of 10,000 variables. We've bumped that up to 50,000. Online programming, that's the capability to make programming changes without stopping the controller. It's actually a special programming mode you have to be in to take advantage of that, and a lot of people don't even realize we have it, frankly, but we'll go through that later. But that has been added now to tag-based advanced ladder, which it was not there before. We've added support for user-defined function blocks, and we've enhanced our subroutines to make them even better. So that's another major enhancement. And we've also included a new kind of power user feature, which is the ability to read and write to removable memory from a structure, to and from a structure. So that is really handy for those power users who have a lot of data they want to log in a really specialized fashion outside of our normal data logging feature. And then in addition to the kind of major upgrades, if you will, there are several ease of use enhancements to try and make it a little bit easier for our register-based customers to take a look at and to utilize the tag-based version of our package. First of all, we've predefined timer, counter, and PID structures, again, to make it easier to use those features in a tag-based environment. We've predefined a number of variables, including system bits and system variables, the ones you're used to using, always on, always off, etc. We've reorganized the data watch window to make it more tag-oriented. We now have even more and more dialog boxes where you can create your variables on the fly if that's the style you want to follow, as opposed to having to necessarily create every variable from the variable window. So that's an improvement for sure. And then we've made enhancements to a variety of different function blocks, including the math expression block, to make it even easier to select the variables that are part of your equation and get a an equation that's the one you want with the right syntax on the first try. Okay, next we're going to take a quick tour of these new features I've talked about for tag-based advanced ladder. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, since a bunch of the enhancements that we've made in Service Pack 3 are related to tag-based advanced ladder programming, let's make sure you're set up to support that in your editor when you've updated to Cscape 9.9 Service Pack 3. Okay, there's a setting under Tools, Application Settings, where you can determine which type of programs or logic styles you want to support in Cscape. The traditional advanced ladder that's register-based, full IEC editing, or the advanced ladder with tags. So if we're going to support advanced ladder with tags, we need to make sure this third one is checked. That way, every time you go to create a new program, you'll be prompted as one of the options for creating an advanced ladder with tags program. What I have in front of me here is the program editing environment or the logic editing environment for using tag-based advanced ladder. Now you'll notice it looks almost identical to register-based advanced ladder. We've got our project navigator here, our project toolbox with all of our instructions, our editing environment, our icons and pull-down menus. It's really the same. The main difference is this program variables window. Now, when we're using register-based logic, we have an IO names dialog we can access from time to time. But with tag-based ladder, we've got this program variables dialog. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a closer look at that, because there's where we've made some changes for 9.9 Service Pack 3, primarily in what's predefined with the program variable window. Okay, let's start with global variables. You'll see that we have added a whole series of variables, or predefined a whole series of variables that are ones that a lot of you are used to using. variables like always on, always off, first scan, the real-time clock system registers, the screen registers for accessing or seeing what screen is currently being displayed. So these are, again, variables you're used to using in register-based ladder. So we went ahead and made them fully predefined with tag-based ladder. Now you'll notice that these variables are still mapped to specific memory locations. And even though one of the advantages of tag-based logic is that you do a whole lot less of mapping, you still have to do mapping when it comes to system bits, system registers, and then real-world I/O, like analog inputs, analog outputs, digital inputs, and digital outputs. But we've done a lot of the work for you by predefining those. Another thing you'll notice as I collapse this here is that we've added a couple of predefined structures to make handling timers and counters more straightforward. So as before, or before with tag-based logic in Cscape, we kind of left it up to you to create, an array of 2 consecutive words or a whole series of arrays of words to use for timer and counter, accumulator, and housekeeping registers. Instead, what we've done is predefined a couple of structures for a 16-bit accumulator timer counter or a 32-bit accumulator timer counter, again, to make that easier. And I'll show you how to use those here in just a second. Now, when we drop a timer in our program, we've always in an OCS, we've always just defined where the accumulator register is located. And then it was implied that there's a housekeeping register after that. Well, in tag-based ladder, the way we want to do this is, again, we're going to assign a new variable or create a new variable. I'll go ahead and go to global variables and hit add variable. And I could do this on the fly. I don't have to do it in advance, but I'm going to do it in advance in this case. So I'm going to name this, let's say, motor timer. Okay. Now, normally I would be tempted to assign this to, say, an unsigned integer or maybe an array of 2 consecutive unsigned integers for use with the timer and the accumulator. But now, instead, let's go ahead and take advantage of this structure that's been predefined with a 16-bit accumulator and another 16-bit register that contains some flags for timing and done. So again, I've got motor timer defined here. Let's go ahead and change the type over to timer counter 16. So I find it in the list here, timer counter 16. Double click on it. All right, there we go. So we've defined a variable called motor timer. It's assigned to the structure of timer counter 16. Now let's go ahead and build a simple rung that utilizes the timer. All right, I'm going to drop down a normally open contact. I believe I had previously created a variable called motor run. There we go. It's a Boolean variable. Okay, got it. I could have just hit enter there. I'll go ahead and hit new rung there. And let's drop a timer down. Okay, when I do that, it pops up, and now it's asking us to define the accumulator location. All right, so let's go pick it from the list. I could also start typing, but I'm just going to pick it from the list. All right, so I'll look here, and at the bottom I see motor timer. I expanded it out, and there's the accumulator. So that's what I want to select there, motor timer.acc, the actual accumulator. And then I'm also going to need to define the set point, or how long it's going to run. I believe I have a variable I previously created that's retained called motor time. I'll select that here. Okay, so now I've got a timer that's going to time as long as the motor is running. And then it'll expire when the motor time variable is reached, that value is reached. Okay, now if I want to turn a pilot light on or something, of course, the easy thing for me to do is just to drop a coil here. But that wouldn't be a very good illustration of how the flags work for timing and done. So I'm going to go ahead and utilize one of the flags instead. Let me scoot this down here a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and drop a normally open contact here. And what I'm wanting to access here is the timer done flag. So how do I find that? Well, I go to my variable selection button here, go back down to my motor timer, but this time I select the flags register. Now, I want specifically the 16th bit of the flags register because that's the one that turns on when my timer has expired. So I'm going to add to the end here a .16, okay, and hit OK. And that's the flag that will effectively turn on when this timer has expired. And of course, I could just drop a coil here, but that wouldn't be much of an example. Now I can add my coil to this rung and turn a pilot light on or something when that timer has expired. So hopefully that illustrates for you one of the easier ways to use timers and counters with the tag-based version of Cscape. One of the power features in tag-based programming in general are user-defined function blocks. Now, I've covered them in quite a bit of detail in another webinar, so I'm not going to go into huge amounts of detail here, but I did want to cover them. So effectively, a user-defined function block is a powerful way to reuse sections of code to modularize it, and they differ from subroutines in that you can have multiple instances of user-defined function blocks running simultaneously with their own dedicated sets of variables. So again, that's pretty powerful. So what I've got here, if you take a look over at our project navigator area, you'll see the normal main loop modules, which has the default of main, and you can add additional main loop modules there. You will also see subroutine modules that can be added. I don't happen to have any here. And then you've got UDFB modules, which is unique to tag-based programming and the IEC package in Cscape. So I've created a UDFB called start stop. Well, what is that? Well, it's just a section of code, and I'm showing it here, which just handles starting and stopping a motor with a delay time before it started and with a maximum run time after it starts running. So just some relatively simple logic, but logic that I would potentially repeat over and over again with a whole series of motors. So I've modularized it. Okay, so when you create a user-defined function block, one thing you'll find, and mine's called start stop here, one thing you'll find is in your variable section, you have a section in your variable table that shows up. So in this case, let's take a look at the variables that I've dedicated to this user-defined function block. I have a series of input variables, start push button, stop push button, delay time, run time. I have a single output variable, which is just motor, whether it's running or not. And then I have delay timers and run timers, which are just used internally. You'll see they're not designated as input or output. So again, I have the ability to create unique instances of user-defined function blocks that are running this exact code. And so let me go to my main loop. And you can see in this case, here we go. We've got 3 specifically different instances of this particular user-defined function block, each with its own set of input variables and output variables. And again, these can run simultaneously. So this one could be in the middle of timing, the start. This one could be stopped. This one could be running and in the middle of timing the maximum amount of time it can run. Again, they can all be running simultaneously, and there are multiple instances of this code going at once. That's the biggest difference between a UDFB and a subroutine. When we added support for user-defined function blocks, we also decided to go ahead and enhance our subroutine support as well. Well, how did we do that? Well, on this project I was showing you before, I went ahead and created a subroutine to go along with it, and I've added that here. Subroutine is called liquid volume. This is just a simple subroutine that effectively calculates the volume of liquid in a tank and moves on its very way. So very simple. Does a couple math operations and a conversion. Okay, well, one thing that we did to enhance our subroutine capability is now we have input and output variables for subroutines as well. So I can go here under liquid volume in my variable table, expand that out here, and you can see that I've created, and I'll stretch out this name so we can read it better. I've created a couple of input variables in tank diameter in feet, liquid level in counts, an output variable, which is the number of gallons, which is what I'm going to return from the subroutine, and then a couple more internal variables here. So what this does is make it easier when we're calling the subroutine. So it really doesn't have much of an impact when you're writing your subroutine, but when you're calling the subroutine, it makes a real impact. So let's go back to the main loop and see how the subroutine call looks different now. So instead of just being a call subroutine, now when we double click and take a look at the details, you can see that we have the ability to easily assign the inputs that are going to the subroutine and the output variable coming from the subroutine. So that's a big advantage. It looks a little bit like UDFBs, doesn't it? But keep in mind, you can only have one instance of a subroutine running at any given time. You can't have multiple instances running simultaneously like you can with UDFBs. So the addition of dedicated input and output registers, or variables I should say, is a real enhancement, especially when you're calling a subroutine. A capability that's been in the register-based version of Advanced Ladder for some time is the ability to do what's called an online programming change. With an online programming change, you can change the logic in your controller without stopping it first. So you download the new program, logic only, into the OCS, and then when that's complete, the program, which has been currently running the whole time during the download, is seamlessly switched to the new program, and you continue on. You also have an "oh darn" button that allows you to revert back to the first program if things didn't go as you expected. All right, let's show you how it works. So first of all, you'll notice that we're connected to our OCS. In this case, I'm connected to a EXLW. And I'm going to go ahead and enter online programming mode, which is available here from these set of icons. Okay, it flags I'm about to enter online programming mode. And I'm in. My target indicator shows that I'm in online change mode with an S. It used to be an R for run mode. Okay. Another thing you'll notice that while I'm in online change mode is my download button has disappeared. So if I want to do a download and online change, instead, I press this button here to initiate the download of the logic. Okay. It informs me that the modified logic program has been loaded to my target, and by pressing OK, that will initiate the switch to the new program, because currently, and the whole time, it's been running the old program. I'll say OK, and now we're running the new program. Now, if something didn't go as planned and I wanted to revert back to the first program, I could press this "oh darn" button here, and it would go back to the previous program. Okay, for those of you who are not necessarily looking for enhancements for tag-based logic, or maybe you are, but you'd like to see what else we've got in Service Pack 3, from a graphic side of things, we've made some enhancements, including a much requested change, and that's the ability in the micro series to increase the number of objects on an individual screen from 30 up to a new value of 100. So even though 30 objects seems to be a lot on a 4-inch screen, for example, it's not as much on a 7-inch screen, and people certainly have a desire to put more detail in their screen. So they want to create screens similar to what you see here on the slide, and to do that they need more than 30 objects. So that's an enhancement that Service Pack 3 adds. Also for the micro OCS crowd, and this applies also to the XLE with Ethernet and the XLT with Ethernet, we are supporting SSL encryption for both email and WebMI, which currently those features in those products are supported unencrypted. But again, with Service Pack 3 and new firmware, you'll be able to add encryption. Okay, let's take a look at some new networking features or Ethernet features that we're adding. We're adding DHCP and DNS support. Traditionally in the industrial world, we have been very comfortable in manually setting our internet addresses. Our Ethernet addresses. But there are more and more applications where a fairly sophisticated DHCP server is desired to be used. And so we are allowing support with our XL series products from the XL4 on up, along with RCCs and our XL Plus to support those sort of architectures. Also, we're adding more support for DNS. We currently mainly support it with our email functionality, but we're now adding it in general to our product. Some other enhancements on the communications front, and that is more flexibility in your modbus TCP client or master applications to be able to effectively start and stop the protocol in general, maybe to act kind of as a reset to close the port and reopen it, or probably even more functionally, the ability to enable or disable individual slaves so that when they go down because of maintenance or some other reason, they don't adversely affect the communications. So that's another big enhancement. And then we had an entire webinar on MQTT Sparkplug to talk about that particular protocol, and Service Pack 3 is where we've incorporated that. So, that's an exciting new IoT-based protocol that allows OCS products to push data as opposed to strictly having it pulled out of their memory. It allows you to publish data as topics, and you can control very precisely when data is published or pushed by the OCS, whether that's periodically on a trigger or change of state or a change of value. Okay, so for these three networking related type features, let's go ahead and take a look at those right now. Oh, one thing I will mention before we do the online demonstration. The MQTT Sparkplug feature is a licensed feature. Now that's going to be very modestly priced at only $50 US. It's a one-time upgrade that can be done in the field. There are no recurring costs, so it's not a subscription of any kind. The licensing process is performed from Cscape, and that will be streamlined with the rollout of the new Cscape registration process. And then something else. I encourage you to try out this new feature. We are offering free permanent licenses to be available through the end of the third quarter. So what does that mean? It's not a trial. It doesn't mean that you can try it out on a unit and then the capability expires at the end of October. What it means is that between release time and the end of October, you'll be able to license your OCSs to support MQTT protocol at no cost. And those units that are licensed will be permanently licensed. And then starting in November, when you license units, starting in November, then you'll need to pay for the licenses at a very modest cost. So I wanted to mention that. That's an important fact or important aspect of MQTT. But there's a lot of benefit to getting data from the machine, from the site, up to where it can be analyzed and logged on a centralized basis. So that's an important protocol. Okay, now let's go ahead and take a look at our new networking features, kind of walk you through setting those up. All right, next let's go ahead and take a look at some of the new additions for the LAN configuration or the Ethernet configuration for the XL series. All right, so I'm going to go to hardware configuration, which I can access from this button or one of the pull downs. I'll just go ahead and access it from this button. In this case, I am connected to one of our new EXLWs, which as an XL series member is one of the products that now supports additional options for Ethernet configuration than before. So here's the config button for LAN 1. And you can see now we have additional options. So as before, we have IP address, net mask, and gateway, but now we also have DNS server internet location where the OCS can go look up a URL, for instance. And these are all assignable either as hard-coded in Cscape or assigned to variables, which I've done here. And then another new addition is the DHCP checkbox. So if I wanted to use a DHCP server to access these parameters instead of the other options, then I could use this checkbox. So again, these are new additions for 9.9 Service Pack 3 when it comes to Ethernet configuration, and that applies to both LAN 1, LAN 2 if it exists, and the Wi-Fi adapter if that's plugged in as well. Another new capability we've added in Service Pack 3 is an enhancement to protocols like our modbus TCP client, or sometimes called modbus TCP master protocol. We've given customers the ability to disable the protocol as a whole, or to disable communications with individual servers or individual slaves on the fly. So this is something they've been asking for some time. So let me show you an example here. So the best way to illustrate this is to go ahead and pull up the graphics screen here. So what I have is an example where I have 3 variable frequency drives, and I'm communicating with them over modbus TCP, gathering frequency data and amperage data, and also having the ability to make adjustments, for instance. But what you'll see here is I now have added to my screen an online-offline button. That's because I now have the ability in Cscape to dynamically enable and disable Modbus slave devices on the fly. So let's see how that's implemented. Okay, so we access Modbus TCP master configuration from the I/O or hardware configuration area under network ports, and this is a LAN protocol or Ethernet protocol, so I'll hit the configure button. And then down here under downloadable protocols, you'll see Modbus client, which is effectively Modbus TCP master. Okay, so under the network section, you'll see I now have a Modbus TCP disable bit that I can assign to disable the protocol as a whole. Now that could be useful for actually performing almost like a reset on the communications, at least on the master side, because what it effectively does is closes the port and then reopens it again the next time it's enabled. So this is new for Service Pack 3. But in my example, I'm showing you the fact that on the device level, okay, we now have a disable bit for each slave device as well, or each server device as well. So again, by flipping that switch, we can temporarily take that slave offline without having any adverse effects on the communications as a whole. And then when we toggle that disable back to an enable state, then it brings that slave back online. Finally, I want to talk about configuration of MQTT Spark Plug, which is a new IoT protocol that we've added in Service Pack 3. Okay, now to configure MQTT, we need to go to the Program menu. Under Messaging, you'll find MQTT. Now, I spent an entire webinar talking about MQTT, how it works, and effectively how you configure it in Cscape. But even since that webinar, we've refined a little bit the dialog boxes just to make it a little bit easier, because it can be a little bit complex. Okay, on the first level, we have to select the profile of MQTT that we want to use. Now, ultimately, we'll have profiles here for AWS from Amazon, Microsoft Azure, and others. But for now, we have the one that's been requested the most from us, and that is a MQTT profile called Sparkplug. Okay, so we just select that. On the controller level, we're configuring the OCS effectively to push data to a broker. So what do we need to configure? Well, first we configure a status variable or a series of status variables where we will monitor our communications with the broker and see statistics such as how much data we've published, how much has been received, etc. We'll assign a variable that must be set in order to enable MQTT communications. We need to assign a unique client ID. It just needs to be unique. It can be anything, but it has to be unique. So because MAC addresses are always unique, remember those are tied to the LAN address of the OCS, we've made it easy for you to use your MAC address as your client ID. Next, there are two more parameters to set. There's a group ID, which is a logical way of assigning a group to a series of OCSs that might be pushing data. So for instance, Indie Plant could indicate that all these OCSs are pushing data from the Indie Plant. And then Node ID is the specific ID associated with this particular OCS that's pushing data. In this case, I'm simulating a molding machine, so I've named it Molder 1. Okay, so that's the controller level. Next, on the broker level, we need to define how we're going to connect to the broker, including things like which IP address to use and login credentials. Also encryption if that applies. And then we also then would define a series of topics, which is data that we're going to push to the broker. So first I've defined a topic, process data, that contains three variables: my mold temperature, mold pressure, and mold time. And I'm going to push this data to the broker every 5 minutes. Now, one thing to note about MQTT Spark Plug is that all data I publish has the capability of coming back to me as subscribed data. But in this case, I'm primarily sending out process data, so I don't expect that to come back at all. I've also got another topic here called set points. And this is the set point for my temperature, pressure, and time. And this is data that even though I'm showing it as published, I am fully expecting it to come back to me from the SCADA package or whoever is connected on the other end to the broker. Okay, and in this case, I'm only going to trigger or publish this information on a trigger so that if locally, let's say, a set point is made in the plant, a set point change is made in the plant, that change can then be pushed to the broker, and then it'll be seen by the SCADA package on the other side. Okay, so that was a run through of some of the new features on the networking side and communication side of things. All right, so now let's kind of walk through the firmware requirements and bug fixes. All right, let's start with the firmware requirements. Now, a number of the features that we've covered will require a new firmware, and that will be version 15.40. So if you look at this chart here, with the exception of Cscape registration and the tag-based programming improvements, or at least most of them, those don't require firmware updates, and pretty much everything else will. You can see I've also categorized the features and which controllers they apply to. So that first group there applies to all the modern products, whether that be the XLE and XLT, the micro OCS, the XL series from the XL4 on up, and the RCC. We've got the 100 objects per screen and the encryption capability that's been added to the micro series. And that also applies to the XLE and XLT with Ethernet, by the way. The encryption does, at least. And then the DHCP DNS, as well as MQTT Spark Plug, that's strictly for the I guess you can call them higher end products, which is effectively the XL4 on up, plus the X5 and the RCC, but does not include the RCC 6512. Okay, let's talk a little bit about a few bug fixes. I'm not going to go into much detail here. You may or may not recognize a bug on this list as one that you've run into, probably more than likely not, since a lot of these are somewhat obscure. One thing I will mention that's a little bit more mainstream, and it's really more of an improvement rather than a bug fix, and that is the 5th one on the list there. On the micro OCS side, we've greatly enhanced the filtering on the analog, which has some impact. You know, some of that enhancement came from firmware changes. So you will notice with 15.4, significantly better stability on 4 to 20 milliamp as well as RTD inputs for the micro OCS series. So, you know, it's not like it was unstable before, but we've just made significant improvements, especially for, you know, real noisy environments. Okay, now the $100,000 question. When can I get this? When can I get Service Pack 3 and the firmware? Patience. Look for an announcement in early July. Yes, we're overdue, as we often are. One of the things I'm very, I guess, proud of, is one way to put it, is that I think we've done a pretty good job of working with our beta testers. And I thank you out there to those of you who were and continue to be beta testers. We've incorporated their feedback as best we can in this release. And we're working really hard to make sure that what we do release is super stable. So that's why we're a little behind schedule. But look for an announcement in early July. And also keep in mind that for some of these features, of course, you're going to need new firmware, 15.4, and those won't come out all the time at once. So you'll get a staggering of releases for different families. And again, we get them out just as quickly as we can to ensure the quality of the release. Okay. Let's take a look at some questions here. Okay, Dana helped me out early on, making sure I knew that I was being heard. So thank you for that, Dana. Let's see, what do we have here? For the login registration, I most often do not have internet access. Will this work offline? Excellent question, Caleb. Thank you for that. Absolutely, it will work offline. We just ask that when you do have internet access that you do log in. But if you need to work offline for months at a time, even that won't be a problem. And also, if you don't have internet access, you know, let's say that you're loading Cscape from a memory, from a USB card or something, and you don't have a chance to register right away, even, then you'll still be able to use it. You'll be able to use it in evaluation mode, and it won't be a major pain. Again, the whole point of the registration process, you know, is to close the feedback loop between our user base and our developers so that we can do a better job of incorporating your feedback and adding features that you want and enhancing pieces of the software that you use. Okay, so we've got some feedback from somebody who said that when they updated their password with the new universal login, that they still had to use a different password for WebMI. So they asked if we would check into that, and we will. So again, like I mentioned in the presentation, we're shooting towards a universal set of login credentials that will work both for WebMI or any other license feature, as well as Cscape and any of our websites, whether it's our US website or our fine European website, whatever the case may be. So looks like we may have a little bit of a glitch there, but we'll work through it. Let's see, can you set tag-based ladder as the default when you open Cscape? Yes, ultimately you can. When the area of the setup options that I showed in my demonstration, you can check which of the languages you want to support on loading, okay, when you open a new program. So you could, for instance, decide that, you know, my default program is going to be tag-based. So you could check only the checkbox for tag-based ladder. You would still have the ability to open other ladder programs, even if they were register-based. But when you created a new project, it would be, effectively, it would be, you know, tag-based ladder. So it's a little bit of a workaround there, but that's a good point. And we may want to add a formal way of setting a default ladder logic style. Let's see, where will I find a reference to the map of all the timer flags? Good point. You'll find that in the help file. Now there's only 2 flags, okay? Flag, the 16th bit is timer expired or counter expired. Effectively, it's reached its set point. And then timers only have a 15th bit that's active, which basically means the timer is active. So that's the only flags that are available, but you will be able to find them in the help file. Let's see. Are you going to offer an online resource where customers can download and share UDFBs? That's a great idea. One of the things we're really working towards, and Cscape 10 is a major step in that direction from some of the tools that we're using for our help materials and our online help materials and training videos and those sorts of things, is we're really working towards building a community where people can, who are, have questions on Horner products, can, gather and share information and those sorts of things. So yeah, we definitely have something we want to work towards, but we're not there yet. Let's see. Can you also do online changes in protocols? No, not at this stage. At this stage, it's logic only. Now we do have another feature in the works that has been released, I believe, for the XL Plus 15-inch, and that is called Live Graphics Update. So from an online programming standpoint, you'll have the capability, of course, or you do have the capability to change your logic on the fly without stopping. With the Live Graphics Update, with the higher end products, not just the XL Plus, but the XL4 on up, that group of products, you'll also have the capability, once that's released, to do a graphics update on the fly, which will be especially important for a remote change, of course. But at this stage, we don't have a way of doing it with any of our communications protocols. So I'll take a look, and we'll talk to engineering and see what that might entail. Does the online programming work with all controllers? Good question. No, it does not. So effectively, the online change works from the XL4 on up, along with the X5, which is kind of a unique product, which is more like an XL series product than it is like a micro product from a under the hood standpoint. So yeah, so you're talking about XL4 on up, along with the XL Plus, which of course is way up from the XL4. Let's see. To increase the objects per screen above 30, do we need to update the firmware? Yes. So for the X4 or X7 micro OCS products that have new capabilities above 30 objects per screen, it will require a firmware update, as well as Service Pack 3. Let's see. When you disable a slave, will the status, now we're talking about Modbus TCP communications, for instance. When you disable a slave, will the status registers automatically go to 0 for that slave so you don't get false error codes? Good question. I'm not sure. I'll need to look at the details on that, but that's a question we'll get answered. Let's see, is free MQTT license available outside the US? I don't have an answer for that right now. I don't want to give you an off the cuff answer, but when we do have, again, free licenses for for the first quarter of release or so, whatever restrictions there may be in terms of region, I'll try and make sure that those get announced well in advance. So we'll get an answer to you on that one. Let's see, will we be able to set the Modbus slave address as a variable instead of hard-coded? We're slowly, or trying to be quickly, but we're slowly working towards having less and less hard-coded parameters when it comes to communication. So if we're not there yet, we're working that direction, but we've got a ways to go. Question about live screen updates. Yes, that is planned, as I just mentioned. It's called the Live Graphics Update, again, from the XL4 on up. How would you connect to a PLC that is DHCP and not static, as the address may change? Yeah, good point. And that's really the whole reason that we've resisted supporting DHCP before now. And that is because the potential is there where your IP address could change and things would not be able to communicate. So yeah, that is an issue with DHCP potentially. And so again, until recently, we have pretty much avoided supporting it, but we've been convinced by our customers that we need to support it. And yes, we are supporting it on both LAN ports as well as the Wi-Fi port if the Wi-Fi dongle is plugged in. Let's see, is there thoughts about allowing WebMI to work on more than just LAN? Maybe another, I guess, I'm not sure. The question maybe, obviously Wi-Fi is currently supported as well as a wired LAN. Maybe thoughts on other, he may be asking about maybe other media outside of Ethernet even. I'm not sure on that one, but I'll follow up and we'll see if we can get some more details on that. There's a question about Service Pack 4 and the fact that we'll be able to convert existing register-based applications into tag-based applications. Until Service Pack 4 is released, is this a service Horner can perform for us? You know, we're a cooperative bunch, so we will do our best to take care of anybody that we can. I'm not sure that's something we'll be able to do very easily, but we certainly will not dismiss it out of hand. Now keep in mind, there probably won't be a huge amount of time between Service Pack 3 and Service Pack 4. Here's why. Service Pack 4 really does not have a lot in it. It just has a couple of big items. One is the big enhancements coming for our IEC programming logic package that's part of Cscape. That's going to be a huge update, so that's there. And then this conversion capability of register-based to tag-based advanced ladder programs. So I know it's two great big things, but those are the major things. So I would anticipate that, you know, the release of Service Pack 4 isn't as far away as you might think. And it would not be a webinar if I didn't get a question about IO-Link. So yes, IO-Link is definitely on our product roadmap. And I am guessing here, but I would think that we'll have some sort of solution for you in 2021. That's a Horner-based IO-Link solution. For now, of course, there are IO-Link gateways that people have used with our products, you know, that effectively, you know, allow you to connect via modbus TCP to the OCS, and those gateway products drive the IO-Link network themselves. PLC simulator, any part of an upcoming release. So Service Pack 4 includes the greatly enhanced IEC capability. And that greatly enhanced IEC capability includes simulation for all the logic. So yes, that will be included in Service Pack 4, and of course also in 10. And then at some point, hopefully relatively soon after 10, we'll have simulation available in the you know, advanced ladder with tags option. Can you clarify the MQTT is supported on the floor? Yes, it is. You're correct. My slide did show a greater than XL4 symbol. It should have been a greater than or equal to XL4 symbol, because the XL4 absolutely, along with the X5, by the way, does support the MQTT protocol. It's any of our products that are Linux-based in their real-time operating system. Let's see, a question about an NTP server bug. So I'm not intimately familiar with that particular one, but we will, I'll have somebody follow up on that to find out where that stands. Any improvements in Cscape help? Okay, here's the plan with Cscape help. There is a current ground up rewrite of the help file underway, which is a huge undertaking because that help file is effectively evolved over 20+ years. So yes, there is big changes to the help file coming. It's going to a completely new platform in terms of the technology. So there not only will be local help through the form of a help file available on your computer all the time, there'll be online help that's live that can be updated at any time. That's where we will have links to training videos, and where we'll ultimately have links to a user community and those sorts of things. So big plans there. But the first release of the new help file is Cscape 10. So we'll have to limp along in 9.3 and 9.4 with the current one. Another concern about internet connection, don't worry about that with Cscape registration. Won't be a problem. If you can only occasionally get in, you'll be fine. And when I say occasionally, I mean every few weeks even. You'll be fine. Everything you need will be available locally on your computer. Are the tag names and comments downloaded into the PLC, or do they stay with the project? They are absolutely downloaded into the controller, as long as that's the option that you've selected. You have to actually uncheck an option to prevent that from happening. Let's see, any enhancements to remote program updates where and when the cell connection burps and the OCS is not bricked, loses the IP address? Excuse me. Yes, so obviously when you do remote internet updates, there's always risk, right? Especially over cell. And we love doing it, of course, because it prevents us from driving 300 miles to a job site. But there are risks, of course. So there are an evolving number of changes to the way we're doing downloads. You know, I talked about online graphics updates. What allows online graphics updates to work will be the fact that the graphics files will be downloaded basically like a file and not a live program change. So therefore, it'll be just a, you know, after what could be a lengthy program download, which is effectively a file download, you know, depends on your internet connection bandwidth, of course. But after that's complete, then it's just a switch over to the new program. It's not a case where if it's interrupted at any point, you've got a problem. So yeah, we are absolutely working towards those sort of improvements, but we're not there yet. Okay. Okay, let's see. Had a nice feedback from a customer who appreciates the direct connection and access that we're providing, and we're all, that goes two ways. We really appreciate the attendance we get for these webinars and the time that you guys spend. And yes, we will send the presentation out to those that need it. Let's see, we use Modbus. How does the tag-based stuff translate to Modbus? Great question. Yeah, so here's the approach that you take, at least in the short term. So effectively what you're going to do from a Modbus standpoint is you are going to, you know, as you, let's say I'm a Modbus master, the OCS, and remember, whenever I say OCS, I mean a Horner all-in-one controller. The OCS is the Modbus master. So it's going to be reading Modbus parameters, which are always word-based. That's the definition of Modbus. Reading from Modbus variable space, you know, register space, which, you know, the traditional 5-digit addressing is 40,001 through whatever. And so you're going to be reading that data, for instance, maybe one register at a time, hopefully a block at a time, and then copying those into a local variable in the OCS. So what you'll do, what I typically do, is I create typically a single variable called Modbus data, okay, which, or I might call it Modbus read data, which is an integer-based variable, right? Because all Modbus data is integer-based. Even if in the end it's 32-bit data, it all starts out as an integer. So I create that variable as an integer, and then I give it a dimension or an array, turn it into an array of, let's say, I don't know, 50 registers, okay? So I've got, you know, Modbus read data sub 0 through Modbus read data sub 49. And then when I map individual parameters or groups of parameters via Modbus into the OCS, I use that, you know, I use the appropriate variable, you know, Modbus read data sub 0, Modbus read data sub 10, whatever the case may be, to read that data into that and to fill those registers. And then I take that data and then I copy it over using a move block to a more user-friendly variable name if necessary. Okay, so that's the approach you use. So yes, you can still do variable-based and still use Modbus. Let's see, do we have any integration with PLC Rockwell and FT ViewMe? We don't have anything like that at this stage. I've got to become familiar with that. I'm not as familiar with all the Rockwell options as I could be. Most of my familiarity with Rockwell from a Horner integration standpoint is all geared around, you know, Ethernet IP or exchanging global tags with a Logix processor over Ethernet IP, that sort of thing. Are there also matching hardware enhancements in the current production of micro OCS units to improve the analog input stability issue? No, not necessarily. We do have ongoing improvements coming. You know, we're you know, anytime you have a relatively new hardware package, and micro OCSs are only a couple years old, you know, early on in the product life, you're going to do a little bit of tweaking on the hardware just to optimize it for a variety of reasons. So there is some of that going on, but I don't know that it necessarily is all geared around stability. I know a lot of our stability enhancements have been really all about the way that we read data from the I/O and how we filter it. So I don't think there's a lot going on in terms of updates to the micro OCS and stability. Any kind of integration with control logics and safety processors. Again, the integration I'm most familiar with is exchanging global tags with control logics or any other logics processor over Ethernet IP. That's a capability that the OCS has had for a while. Daylight readable displays. Yes, we certainly have some things in the works there. Some pretty exciting stuff. Nothing that is going to get launched probably in 2020, although we do have some specialized XL7s, for instance, that we've done for some customers who have some particularly tough outdoor environments, and those will continue and they'll continue to be enhanced. But in terms of brand new product announcements for really sunlight readable stuff, some really cool stuff in the works, but probably more 2021 type release. Let's see. Any way to perform a remote firmware update? We are evaluating kind of a remote firmware update process that would still require a memory card locally, but we're trying to come up with an automated means of performing this so that you don't have to necessarily have a human being at the site, but that's not available yet, but it's something we've been evaluating pretty significantly. Is there a command or bit to reboot the controller? I don't believe there is. You know, you can obviously, you know, program in an infinite loop that is triggered on purpose to do a reset. Not the most elegant in the world, but that's something that I've known a lot of people that have done before, especially on applications where they know it's going to be at a remote, you know, non-manned site. Does MQTT ever queue up for data collection until the broker is available in case of a disconnect? There are some, I think you're talking about like store and forward type stuff. So you would typically do that locally in the OCS. One of the advantages of the OCS having such a large internal memory is that the potential is there for you to do that. So I don't think it's necessarily built into the protocol, but I could be wrong on that. You know, I have to continually keep up to date on all the IoT protocols because I do get them confused from time to time. So I'll do a little more research on that. But certainly because the OCS is an intelligent device with a removable memory device, you can certainly store up data and then again publish it later. You know, if you're using especially manually triggered type publishing. But in terms of if MQTT automatically handles that or not, I don't think so, but I could be wrong there. A plan for online simulation. Yes, Service Pack 4 will have it for IEC sometime around Cscape 10.1, and hopefully it'll be available for everything else. Let's see, a question about how things are coming with our new OCS I/O system that we've been working on in the background for a while. They're coming along pretty good. OCS I/O is a new remote I/O / expansion I/O system that we probably have talked about a little bit in our webinars, some of our future webinars. I would anticipate we'll certainly have some releases on that product this year for sure. But of course, one thing to keep in mind is UL can always be a pain on that. So, you know, getting UL approvals on everything potentially is a roadblock from a timely release, not from a release in general, but a timely release. Here's a suggestion from a customer that when we do simulation, that we should do simulation that takes controller firmware in mind. That's an interesting approach. Something we'll definitely consider there. And then a guy who should know better, what is the plan for simulation? Since he's the owner of the company, he asked that question. Maybe he isn't sure about the plan for simulation, but hopefully we've covered that. Let's see. Oh, I got corrected on one item. We are doing a high visibility display for the X5 this year. So you will see that. Whether we roll it in as an upgrade to the standard display or it's a separate display, I think right now the plan is for it to be an option. That is something that should get out by this year. Thank you for that, boss. I appreciate that. Let's see, planning on any REST-based access to the PLCs? Great question. Absolutely. I'm not sure if it's going in Service Pack 4 or in Cscape 10, but we absolutely have REST server effectively coded and more or less tested. It just needs to get integrated into a mainline release. So what is REST server? Well, REST is, or sometimes called a RESTful interface, is another popular IoT protocol that's often used for things like, by apps that are, let's say, getting the status of your flight. So I'm flying out this afternoon from Chicago on United 1234. I take my app out, I plug in Chicago and United Flight 1234, and my app does a RESTful interface query with a server somewhere, and I get a response, a single transaction that says, here's the status of your flight. And it's not an ongoing connection or anything like that. So that's the nature of REST. So yes, we have incorporated REST where you will be able to, from an app, make a query of an OCS for a specific variable or register, and it will reply back with that transaction with that value. So yes, that is planned. I just don't know specifically which release that's going to be rolled into. Okay, that should do it from a question and answer session. Thank you for hanging in there with me. That probably is a new record for a question and answer session, probably about 30 or 35 minutes in that regard. So thanks once again for great attendance. Keep the feedback coming. Give us ideas for more webinars, the ones that you want to have, and we'll do our best to deliver them for you. So everybody stay safe out there and have an awesome rest of your week.